Welcome back to the Ridiculous Faith Podcast, a space for real stories, real faith, and ridiculous hope. I'm your host, Sarah Ribicki. Today's conversation is one I've been holding with great care. My guest, Dr. Sharon Dippold, is a licensed psychotherapist, best-selling author, and foster care advocate. But more than that, she's a woman who understands what it means to survive, to heal, and to find meaning in the waiting. Dr. Sharon shares her personal testimony through her Garbage Bag Life book series, written from the perspective of her younger self, a little girl navigating abuse, rejection, and constant displacement within the foster care system. Through her story, we explore what she beautifully describes as the innocence of faith, the quiet, resilient belief that forms even in the hardest places. This episode touches on foster care and childhood trauma, but is ultimately a conversation about resilience, voice, and hope, and how God can meet us even when our lives feel unstable or unseen. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive into this powerful conversation. Dr. Sharon, can you please open us up in prayer?
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you. Dear Jesus, thank you for being with me from the time that I was a little girl all the way through my journey. And thank you for standing alongside me when I share your story in all the realms, in all the foster care realms, the church realms, the teaching realms, the school realms. And be with me today as I share your story and our story together on my first podcast ever. So in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Dr. Sharon, for listeners meeting you for the first time, can you share a bit about who you are today and the journey that led you here?
Sure. My name is Dr. Sharon Dippold. I am a mother, a grandmother of 6, super exciting. I am a daughter, and I also am a wife. My journey that led me here today. Also, I do telehealth therapy. So I've been a therapist for about 27 years in private practice, and then a social worker from the time of graduating in 1992. When the social worker degree happened, I wanted to work for the same system that I disagreed with. So I initially became a social worker to kind of make those changes. And in turn of doing that, I then led down the path of doing therapy, which is kind of where, I am today. And then, I've always been a motivational speaker in foster care and on topics of change and how to change the system for 20 some years of sharing my story. And then most recently, I wanted to hit a bigger realm, and I knew writing my story would do that, like to have those voices be heard and be accepted. So I published the first book in the Garbage Bag Life series in 2022. So this is a new journey for me in regards to author and book signing and so on and so forth.
So your work spans therapy, writing, advocacy, and philanthropy. How do all of these threads connect for you?
Change, right? When I think about that, and I'm like, how are they connected? And I think change is a great word, because when I was younger, I think it was part of my resilience. I knew that I needed to change the system, right? Like I'm going to change this. Other foster kids are not going to go through, what I went through. And then, when I got my social work degree, I realized that therapy, because I specialized on foster children, right? That therapy would be that next level, like not only sharing my story and advocating for change, but also offering therapy services along that path. And the whole mission was always about change. Even when I was asked to be a motivational speaker, my thought was, how can I make this impactful? Like the goal is for change. So how can I make that happen? And then again, like I said, even doing the author, it was, what is that next step for me? Like the next step, how can I get more people? How can I reach more people about change? And even at the time, even at the time, it was foster care was not allowed to take, foster parents were not allowed to take children to church.
Wow.
Like it was not. And I remember hearing that because part of my journey was to be a director of foster care, right? So part of my younger years is I became, a director of foster care programs. And I remember reading that legislation, right? That, if a parent did not want you to take your foster child to church, even if the foster child wanted to go to church, it could not happen. Right. So I remember thinking at the time, like, this was such a powerful, like, what a resource they're taking. So even then I became an advocate for change and no. If a child wants to go to church or they want to see what church is, why are the parents able to prevent that from happening? Right. So I think that, it shifted a little bit into the children having more voices when it came to like what they wanted to do.
Yes.
So even in the role of a director, it was about how can I bring a change to the foster care system? And then leading up to, like I said, the books. The books were when I sat down going, I'm not, and praying about it. It's like, I'm not happy with the little trainings how can I reach a bigger audience? And that's when I decided to write my story. And of course, the idea is everyone's like, how can you share your story? I always say that I was protecting, right? Like I can share my story and the details of the trauma because there's like a bubble around me, and that bubble obviously was my faith in Jesus, right? So
Yeah.
like I think for the audience it was something that was so different to see a former foster child sharing the details of the experience, and the question always was how can you do this, or how can you get through this? Like and I've said there's a bubble around me. It's like you experience this, but I'm protecting you. Now I want you to share my story. So even that, I think, was something that was for change because I really wanted to make sure everybody felt what foster care was. And
Mhm.
then, of course, when the books came out, there was no question. It's like, what organizations am I going to donate the proceeds to each of the book sales to a foster care organization? And each book has a different organization. So one book goes to Foster Love, which is about donating suitcases. Another for foster children, right? Another one goes to Ticket to Dream, which is about helping foster children take that next step out of there. So they all tied together with just that one word. It's like how the change, right? So I think that's where they're all connected.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Now, the Garbage Bag Life series uses your younger self as the narrator. Why was it important for you to tell the story through that lens?
One of the things that I've realized, even in my training and even as a therapist, is that people, when you can emotionally get to them, they feel it. And
Yeah.
that promotes the most change, right? So I read other foster care stories where it's more memoir, like kind of related, like you're reading back on somebody's experience, like they're reflecting back on what things were like for them. And I just wanted something different. I wanted you to become me. Right. I wanted the
Yeah.
reader to become the foster child. So I decided, even 10 years. So, I had written the first rough draft like 20 years before I even published it. But I
Oh, wow.
remember saying, yeah. So I remember saying, even then, it's like, I want you to become the foster child. So that's why I wrote it like that. I wrote it that you grow up as one book leads to another book, which leads to another. You grow up with my younger self in foster care. You're in my head with me on all rounds, right? And my discoveries. And therefore, if you're feeling it, it leaves a lasting impact, right? It's
Yeah.
not just something you're reading, you're experiencing foster care with me. So therefore, that promotes the change. And
Yeah.
that's why I kind of wrote it in I wrote it like a lot of people are like, this reads like a novel. Like, and it really does. And that's how I wrote it, right? That it does read like a novel. Like if I'm hiding in the sluice fort, you're hiding in the sluice fort with me, feeling the
Yeah.
water on your feet. Right. If I'm, as we're talking later, getting on the church bus because I was locked out of the foster home, you're on the church bus with me when I had no clue what I was doing. So that's why I wrote it that realm in regards to advocating for changes to kind of really hope that you feel what it feels like.
Yeah. To live in that experience.
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
And in the beginning of all my books, I make a very important point for safety because you're living through the traumas with me. So the first page in every book is here are all the hotlines. Like here's the mental health
Mhm.
numbers, here's suicide numbers, here's trafficking numbers, here's sexual abuse numbers. If you have any trauma history, please read the books with caution. Make sure that that you have a church or a safety network or somebody set up so it doesn't re-trigger you. Because I don't want that to happen. Right?
Right.
That goes against the whole process of change. But
Yes.
yeah, that's why I kind of wrote those along that way.
You have to do that these days because the enemy has been at work in a lot of
Oh,
people's lives and so
yes.
much drama.
Yeah, absolutely. And the enemy, and my daughter said it great. She goes, Mom, the enemy is going to try for these books not to get published. She said they're going to do whatever they can do. The enemy is going to do whatever he can do to make it happen. And I'm like, that's a great point, Jessica. I never thought about it because, one of the things I've always, and I actually say this right in trainings, in our world of social work or in any public realm before, right? That when you do a presentation, you don't bring in religion, right? You're not going to go do a presentation for judges and attorneys and social workers and community members and talk about religion or faith, actually. And my whole joke when I'm doing my trainings, because everybody asks, how did you get through it? And my response is Jesus. And everybody goes
Yes.
quiet, right? And I'm like, he's smarter than everybody in this room. This is what I like to tell everybody in the training. I'm like, he is smarter than everybody in this room because you want me to come, you want me to share my story. Well, guess what? He's part of my story. So he has
Yep.
found a vessel to share his message in realms that where it's not kind of welcomed so much.
Yeah. But we have to let our Jesus light shine.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, many people don't realize what it means when children carry their lives in garbage bags. What do you wish more people understood about that experience?
So I have a little fun challenge for everybody.
Yes.
Garbage bag practice, and actually my dissertation in my PhD program was to interview women all over the United States that had moved in garbage bags. Right. The garbage bag practice has been happening since the start of time. Think about this. It's been happening since the start of time. Here we are in 2026, and it's still happening. So my research looked at and interviewed women what it felt like to move in garbage bags. Because we all know what garbage bags are for. You don't have to be a 3-year-old to know what a garbage bag is for. You see it by the road. You throw your dirty stuff in there. You throw your food,
Yeah.
right? But that's how foster children are moved, and they're still moved in garbage bags today. Right. So that's where the garbage bag series came from. I remember carrying my garbage bag behind me. The women that I interviewed, there was one woman who was 60 years old. She found her grandmother's journal, who is no longer even with us. And she read in her grandmother's journal in like 20s and 30s how she felt moving in garbage bags. Right.
Mm,
And the key is that we all know what it's like to move. Well, we don't, if we don't know, think about it for a second, right? Like sit and think that the next time you go on vacations, don't take luggage, take garbage bags. Can you imagine putting your garbage bag on one of those belts for check-in as you're traveling? They would look at you like, what?
what?
Yeah, what are you doing? But that's what foster children do, right? We're moving
Yeah.
from one place to another and we're carrying garbage bags with us. So I did a training one time and I had a gentleman come up. His name is Bruce, amazing man. He kind of has been my partner for years. And I kind of shared this story. And then I noticed Bruce was carrying garbage bags to all of his meetings. And I'm like, Bruce, what are you doing? He goes, I'm carrying my garbage bag for a month. Every court meeting, he replaced his briefcase with a garbage bag.
Mm.
And he had a tag on it when people are like, what are you doing? He goes, well, this is how foster children do.
Oh,
Right. So whenever I do like a training, I ask them, my thing to you, I ask them to do the garbage bag challenge. And everybody's like, what? Right. I'm like, I said, for the next 2 weeks, when you go to a meeting, take a garbage bag. Take your
yeah.
stuff into a garbage bag instead. Right. And think about it. You can ditch the garbage bag when foster children don't have an option to do that. Now, in all fairness to foster care agencies, their resources were so tight, right? Like if you think about what they have to work with, or the number of children that are in foster care, so I'm not blaming them in any
Right.
kind of way. I just don't think there was ever attention on that practice. There's attention on therapy, right? There's which there should be. There's so much attention on foster children, but a simple practice in regards to how we move them can
Yeah.
impact their self-esteem. And that's what came out of my research. What I found is women are like, I'm garbage. I'm unwanted. I'm thrown away. I feel like nothing. But then then I would wait till the end of my interview, right? And then I'd ask them, well, what does foster care feel like? Do you know that it aligned perfectly? Like they had no idea that I was doing it. Their garbage bag experience was all those words. And then at the end, I said, what does it feel like to be a foster kid? They matched perfectly. So then my argument became, what if we change the garbage bags, right? And it's been proven that if you give a child a garbage bag and another one a piece of luggage, the one that's walking with a piece of luggage or a duffel bag behind them, even though the move is traumatizing and sad, they're still walking a little taller than they
Yeah.
are if they're dragging that garbage bag behind them. So that's where the Garbage Bag Life series came from, because it's one of the main practices I want to change and bring awareness to in regards to moving foster children.
Yes, that's beautiful. And the title is genius.
Yeah.
When you look back at the younger version of yourself now, what do you most want her and readers to know?
That's a really good question. If I was to look back to my younger self, obviously I'm not able to change the experiences of my younger self. It's an interesting question, because I would tell her, because when I was younger, Jesus was my friend. Didn't know what a Bible was, right? And I'll talk about that too. Like all I knew is what I learned really quickly in a Sunday school, and he became my friend, right? I wasn't
Mhm.
talking to Jesus. I didn't know he was my savior at the time. I just knew he
Right.
was my friend, right?
Mhm.
So thank goodness for that friend. Because when I was being abused, I was talking to Jesus. I wasn't praying. I didn't know at the time. Well, I didn't know what I was praying, but in my mind, I was just talking to him.
Right.
Right. So the reason it's hard to answer that question, because I think that was the most powerful resource I had. So if I had to go back to my younger self, I would remind her that she's incredibly strong,
Yeah.
right? That but also because I didn't have any human. Like if we think about foster children, there's usually advocates for foster children. There's usually a family member somewhere, right? There's usually, they just can't go to live with that family, but there's usually a family member or there's somebody. But back when I was involved, there was nobody, right? Back
Mhm.
then, when you left a foster home, you never spoke to them again. You weren't allowed to. Right. So there was nobody that followed me. My caseworker would drop me off. Now, keep in mind, too, I want to say services have changed. Foster care agencies are no longer, hopefully, dropping kids off and disappearing for 3 months until it's time to move them. But
Yeah.
that's how it was then. So I think the fact that I had my friend was the main thing. So I would probably go back and say, like, you are not alone. You have your friend. You have Jesus. He's your friend and don't stop fighting, right? Like find those happy moments, keep finding those happy moments. Like whenever you're afraid, talk to Jesus, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what I thought I was doing. And now I'd say you're praying, keep praying to Jesus, right? But at the same time, I would say whatever you can do, find something that you like to do. Right. Even if it was catching minnows in the creek, which is one of the things that I like to do in one of the foster homes. So yeah, like so the question is, would I go back and tell her anything different? I don't know if I'd go back and tell her anything. Well, I'd say you're not alone because that's what it feels like. Like you're
Yeah.
not alone. This is all you get to grow up, right? Like you get to grow up and decide. Don't let foster care define who you are. And I think that
Yeah.
happens a lot to foster children. The drug addiction rate among foster children is sky high. And I
Yeah.
always say, why wouldn't it be? Like, no offense, like if you escape foster care and you could do a drug and it escapes where you are, that's so easy for that to become a coping mechanism.
Yes.
Right? That's where service providers come in and going, you don't need the drug. I can help you escape.
Mhm.
Right? That's where church can come in and go, you don't need to do that to escape. You come to a church and we're going to wrap ourselves around you. Right? You're not going to be alone. So I think that's what I'd say. It's like, this is only a moment. Foster care is not you.
Yes.
You're not dirty. You're not garbage. So what? And I probably say, because I say this, so what? So what? You're a foster child. So what? I got to learn from 21 families. The other people only get to learn from one. I'm lucky.
Yeah.
It's to kind of find that. So I hope that answered your question in regards to kind of what I would say.
Yes. It's not putting your identity in what you went through, but putting your identity in Christ.
I like the one liner. Well, that absolutely, because Jesus has you. He
Yes.
had me. Like, even when I went back to find my caseworker, right? Because, she found me years later and she said to me, and she didn't know who I was. I went up and I went to her and I'm like, oh, by the way, I'm Sharon. She goes, Sharon. Yep. But I said my last name and she just she froze. She froze. She told me a story that how there was so much trauma in my history that nobody could read my case file completely. Like they would
Oh,
start to read my
mercy.
case file and go, too much, that this is too much. And she said the same thing. And my answer is always the same. She said, how were you? Because what she didn't know at the time is I was a director of a foster care agency and she was a county worker and I was trying to get some of her foster homes for the kids in my agency. So we were at that professional level.
Yeah.
And she's like, how did you get here? My response was, Jesus. And she just
Yeah.
looked at me and she's like, what? So yes, it really is like you are not that unwanted child. It doesn't even have to do with foster care. I say that you are you, right? It doesn't mean that if you're in foster care that you're unwanted or damaged. So what? So what? You were in foster care. The sad news is it had nothing to do with you. Your parents, for whatever reason, just weren't capable,
Yeah.
right? The trauma, though, that can happen in foster care, that is not you. Do not let that trauma define who you are, right?
Yes.
And so it's not the foster care, right? It's the trauma that you experience from foster care. Do not let that trauma you make you, not the trauma.
Yes. We are children of God always. Now,
Absolutely.
you've said my voice matters. At what point in your life did you begin to truly believe that?
Mm. I always was vocal. I always was quite vocal. I didn't have but I think the first time I advocated for myself was what I found is that when I kind of left foster care, right, and was amazingly found this wonderful, wonderful foster family at the age of 15 who became my mom and dad, right?
Yeah.
Like brave people. Oh my goodness, brave. She was brave. She was only like 23. I don't know what she was doing, taking a teenager. Like she was. I always laugh still to this. But I got placed with a nice family, and even though I was with this wonderful family for a couple years, I still found my first relationship was domestic violence.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the other thing. I think that it's so easy for foster children who grew up in trauma and violence and abuse. Our rubber band is stretched. We have a bigger tolerance for that in relationships, right?
Yeah.
Because compared to somebody who has not experienced that, they're like, I'm not doing this. But if you take a foster child who's experienced, it's like, oh, okay, so I'm kind of used to this world. Like, all right,
Yeah.
I think I found my voice the first time when I left that. I was like, and you know what was interesting is when I left that, guess where I was throwing my items in?
A
A
garbage.
garbage bag. And I remember catching because I wanted to get out quick, right? So
Yeah.
it was like I was throwing my items in a garbage bag and I stopped and I'm like, what? No, no, I'm not doing this. And so I literally threw my stuff in boxes, and kind of left that relationship. Again, it was very young. And then I realized I'm like, wait a minute, no, I'm not, that's not okay. And I had to spend some time with myself to realign my rubber band. It's like, no, I need another one. Like those are not going to be my boundaries. And I did a lot of praying and like I had to do a lot of research in regards to what are healthy boundaries? Because mine
Yeah.
are skewed. Right. So yeah, again, even that, I was like, pray, 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 pray. And it was like, and I remember still talking. I'm like, I need to leave this, but I don't want to.
Huh.
Right. Like I need to leave this. So that's that was the first time that I really kind of felt my voice in that realm. And then I think the first time I did a training when it came to like, okay, wait a minute. Like, and I remember because my first training, everybody, like when somebody shares their story, your first instinct is to look down because you're most like embarrassed for them. You're like, ooh, right. And everybody in my training was kind of, when they realized it was my story at the end, everybody was looking down. And I'm like, they're uncomfortable. And I'm like, no, 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 look up at me. I'm like, no, please be comfortable. Ask me questions. This is the time I'm protected. Like Jesus, this is how I describe this. I'm like, it's almost like Jesus said to me, we all know Jesus does not allow children to go through situations like that. He would never allow that. And I always say, but sadly, he's not the only one at work,
Yeah.
right? The enemy would. And I always say, it's like Jesus said, oh, you're going through this. I'm going to put a bubble around you because you're going to do something with this. And it truly is how I feel. Like when I'm doing a training, they're asking me questions. They're like, how does this not bother you? I'm like, it truly doesn't.
Yeah.
Right. When I've written my books, people are like, are you re-traumatized by writing those stories? I'm like, no, I'm protected. I'm not. So that was another time I felt like I had a voice because I said, look up, foster children. Do not look down on foster children. Do not look down on our experience. Do not look down on our trauma because then you're looking down on us.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like, so that was the other time that I really found that and said, I really need to take this voice.
Yes. It's like Jesus, he gives that peace that goes beyond understanding.
Oh yeah, like this is beyond even for myself, and I do telehealth. Like I do therapy. I've been doing therapy for 27 years, right? Like, I mean, if you're coming to me and you share your story, I'm like, ooh, right. That's my first instinct too. Is like, okay, let's create a little safety. Let's make sure you're safe. And for somebody to say, no, I'm good. I'm safe already. We can just talk about it because there's something around me. I'm like, I'm going to want to make sure that what they have around them is real because in my brain, I'm like, well, that's no, maybe that's denial. Maybe that's compartmentalizing. Well,
Yeah.
I've had, but you know what's funny though? As soon as they say how, because they get asked if I'm compartmentalized, and I'm like, my faith, it's Jesus. The people, you can see all the faith-based people in the room. You can see all the believers because their eyes light up and they're like, absolutely, that makes sense. No matter who they are, they could be like a therapist, a doctor, a lawyer. They're like, oh, that totally makes sense. So when you
Yes.
say that to somebody who has they're completely like, oh, we get it now why you're able to do that.
Got to find those Jesus people. Now, how did constantly changing homes and schools shape the way you saw yourself? And how did that evolve over time?
Well, I think, one of the things, again, it goes back to I align with all those women in the
Mm.
study, right? That's how it felt. Like it didn't take, it only took me the first time a foster mother gave me a garbage bag to move. I'm like, was she throwing my clothes away? Because I didn't know I was moving. So
Yeah.
I said to my brother, I remember my brother and I were like, why is she throwing away all of her clothes? I'm like, I don't know. Let's just put our clothes in. We really thought our clothes were, so we knew what garbage bags were because we thought she was throwing away her clothes. We didn't
Yeah.
realize we're going to be dragging them behind us, right? So when I felt the same way, unwanted, definitely unwanted, felt like trash. Nobody wanted me. I used to go, why am I all alone? What did I ever do? Academically, I struggled, of course, right? Of course, I struggled
Yeah.
academically. Had buck teeth, one eyebrow. And so I was an easy target to be picked on, right? So it was all those. So I felt all those things. One of the key things I think over time, I think going to school for social work and then my master's in social work and my PhD was probably my own therapy because I didn't have therapy at the time.
Mhm.
Right. Like it was probably my therapy and like doing that healing and then my own inner voice. And I think praying was the whole source of like, where am I? Where do you want me? What do you want me to do? Even before I go into therapy sessions, I'm like, okay, so you need what do you want from me in this session? Lead me. Like, what is it that you want me to do? So I think that was a conversation, and then finding those answers where like, okay, I need to be okay with me to help
Yeah.
others. So again, it goes back to change. I knew if I was going to be able to do what I wanted to do, I had to like me. Right. I had to learn to like me. I had to learn to kind of be my own advocate to make that happen. So that was that transition.
Yes. What role did unexpected kindness play in your survival and healing?
I think that is a wonderful question. I was never asked that question in a training before. Wonderful question, because it doesn't have to be much.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it could be okay, so, I'll kinda go into the church bus, like, there's the first foster home I was in, I was locked out. Like, literally, we were locked out all day, and, using that example of that, I was playing outside, making mud pies, full of mud, no shoes, just a hot mess at, like, 9 years old, and this bus goes by, and the church bus driver stopped. Thank goodness it was a church bus, that's all I'm saying, seriously, because nobody
Yeah.
knew I got on the bus. Right, this bus stops, and this gentleman goes, "Hey, would you like to go to church?" And I had no idea what that was. And I'm like, "Yeah, why not? I don't have nothing else to do but make," and the kids were laughing and having fun. So I thought, "Why not? Sure, I'll get on the bus." So that was an act of kindness, right?
Yeah.
Meredith, who I sat with in the seat and kind of told was to, like, looking and realized I didn't have shoes on, was kind, right? She's the one that took me into church that morning and kind of cleaned me up and gave me slippers so I could wear slippers throughout the church. She was kind. The Sunday school teacher that morning who, a quick event, and then I'm going to come back to the kindness. I want to kind of go here for a second. I was not a very good reader. And so she had the kids who I didn't know in Sunday school reading the Bible. So can you imagine me trying to read the Bible? Like that was just, that wasn't happening. So of
Yeah.
course kids started laughing. Can be kids. So I remember going over and sitting at this desk and my head was down and I was crying and she comes over and I look up and my safe person and my foster father was a wonderful man. I spent all my time in the garage with him, helping him paint cars and do cars. He was the only kind soul, right? And I look up and I'm staring at this picture and I'm like, "Who's that?" And she goes, "Do you know him?" And my joke is, "Yeah, I think daddy fixed his car." I think my daddy worked on his car. She goes, "Maybe, honey, but I don't think Jesus has a car." And I'm like, "Well, who's Jesus?" Right. And then she taught me to pray. And she's like, "If you believe in him, he'll be with you forever, no matter what." I'm like, "What? Like, why that's silly. Like, why would like, where is he? I want to see him." She's like, "Honey," and then she went through the whole thing. That was an act of kindness, right?
Yes.
Teachers were an act of kindness. I had a teacher who gave me a birthday because I didn't know when my birthday was. And I, to this day, we go, why didn't she just look in my records? And the only thing I could think is that she wanted me to have a birthday the next day, right? Which was in September 19th, because my birthday was, I learned years later, was in February. So she threw me a birthday party the next day. And I didn't even know what my birthday was, right? And she had one. So I think that it doesn't take much for somebody to do an act of kindness, no matter who you are. Right, especially with a child, they're not gonna trust you. Right, I always say sometimes with children that they're hard to trust you. When Meredith was doing this act of kindness with me, I was horrible at school, and I remembered when we, I remember when we arrived at the church, it looked like a math building. Seriously, my thought I got on a bus to go do math. I was devastated. I was shaking. I was like, "Get me off this. This is school. They're gonna think I'm dumb," right? And it was her act of kindness to go, "Honey, it's not a math building." Right? Like, this is kind of where we're going, and then her educating me on all those things, and even on the bus home, she goes, "How did you feel about meeting Jesus?" And I'm like, "It was weird." That's what I said. I don't like, "It's weird." She goes, I'm like, "How can you pray to the clouds?" And she kind of was like, "Honey, you have faith, and he's in heaven, and this was what heaven is." And I remember that day, she goes, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you pray to Jesus? You learned it and like, did you learn it?" I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "Just kind of pray." And so this prayer has taken me through my entire life. It's a funny 9-year-old faith by innocent story. Remember I shared I had buck teeth and one eyebrow and kids made fun of me and the whole thing. So I sat there and I'm like, "Okay, Jesus, let's make a deal. All right, let's make a deal." I'm like, "I will believe in you forever. I will talk to you forever if you give me two eyebrows, straight teeth, make me pretty because all the kids think I'm ugly, right?" And at the time, a car went by with a family. And I'm like, "Give me one of those. You give me one of those, and I'll believe in you for the rest of my life, no matter what anybody says." And I get done, and I didn't realize I was whispering, and I look at her, and her act of kindness was just reaching out, grabbing my hand. She goes, "That's the most beautiful prayer I've ever heard, honey."
Mm.
Right? But it's the
Yeah.
innocence, right? It was the innocence that kind of go along. So I think anybody can do an act of kindness. It doesn't make a
Yeah.
difference who you are. You can be in a grocery store. right? Like you can be anywhere. So I think those make a huge difference for children.
Yes, I agree. Now, in seasons marked by abuse, rejection, and instability, what helps you keep going?
Jesus.
Jesus.
Jesus, my friend. Like literally, I would pray in the closets. I would pray when there was sexual abuse going on. Like I was never in my head, I was always with him, right? Like, so that was the key of, I think, anything. And, that it's funny because I had a colleague of mine who's not a believer told me, well, what you were doing with this was disassociating and you didn't realize it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. And what my response was, oh, well, that was the best disassociating I've ever done. So I'm going to teach people how to do that.
Right.
That was the response. Well, you're disassociating. You didn't know that. But I think, again, being in those places and, because at the time I didn't know how to use one-liners. I didn't know how to use, this isn't my forever life, because that was my life. As a child, you can't picture yourself as an adult. Right?
Yeah.
I wasn't able to use that this will soon be over, or it's not, because I didn't believe that. Right. So the only thing that I had was, what can I hold on to? Right. And well, besides Jesus was the main one. And also too, I always tell foster parents, give foster children something to be responsible for, no matter how loving your home. Because I found that I became a protector. So I was a protector of my brother Curtis, and that carried a lot of energy. So no matter what abuse was happening to me, I had to protect him. Right.
Yeah.
And then when we were separated a couple years later, the system separated us, then I'd find other foster children in other homes that I felt like I needed to protect. Right. So I think those two things became a major thing for me in regards to keep me going, because I can't fall apart because I have to protect them.
Right. You have a duty then.
Yes, as a purpose.
How has faith or faith adjacent hope intersected with your healing journey, even if it wasn't always clear or linear?
Well, when you've kind of heard me talk about the innocence of my younger, I had no idea what that was. When I was younger, it was just the total innocence of kind of having that, which carried me through many things, and then obviously when I remember that was which is interesting with my story, is I was in 21 different foster homes. Right?
Mhm.
So that was the first one. And then I didn't experience church at any other foster homes because nobody went, right? So it wasn't until, but I still kept talking, right? I can remember a dark side to my life story. I can remember when the system put me back to live with my birth mother for a period of 6 months. To this day, I know she was doing enemy work. Okay. At the time, I didn't know because I remember she called it black magic. Right. And I remember
Mhm.
being in the room with her when she'd rock that table back and forth and her eyes would roll in her head and she would tell me she's making money because she was talking to dead people and da 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 da. And I remember she came in my room and she heard me talking to Jesus and she was angry. She was like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? Right. So even in those dark times, like I still had those conversations. I never stopped my conversations with him. And then when I met my family when I was 14. That's the first time I went to a youth group. So I got to go back to a church and back to, I'm like, so this, because I didn't know what it was. All
Yeah.
I knew is that Jesus was my friend. Right. So it was the first time I did youth group, and then I joined the choir, and then I became involved in the church. And then we were doing all these like camps and all these different things that I started kind of really piecing together what I had as
Mhm.
a child that I didn't realize that I had as a child. Because then I understood the power of
Now, what does resilience look like when it's real and lived, not just inspirational language?
like balancing is the key. This, like, you could teach resiliency not only to trauma, resiliencies and anxiety, resiliencies and depression, resiliencies and bipolar, because resiliency is, how do you find the balance, right? A good example is, I got a window behind you, right? So if I look out my window, I'm like, are you kidding me? It's snowing again. Great. Well, your brain stores the last thought, and it's going to give your body energy, and how you store that with the last thought. So if I'm like, here we go. That's like, oh, like a beat up, like a depressive, like whatever. If I'm like, you know what? There's snow on the trees and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's actually a form of resiliency. That is balancing. I'm not like, that's great. You want me to find the positive. I'm like, no, I want you to find the balance. Right. Like I want you to find the balance. So when you heard the example of where I said, you know what? I got to learn from 21 families. Maybe you only got one. That's actually a form of resiliency.
Yeah.
Right? Right? So that's, and when I say that, people look at it and they're like, "Huh?" And I'm like, "'Cause resiliency is just doing that." Like when I was even in my foster homes, I always found a safe place. I always found a hiding place, right? That's actually a form of resiliency, right?
Yeah.
So rather than getting stuck on something bad's going to happen, I was like, "Oh, let me plan for if it does." Right? So it's those kind of things. regarding to how to find the resiliency, because resiliency can be in anything, trauma, right? How do you reframe something that was traumatic? How do you take that same experience, which I did, right? Because what do you hear me say? What I said was like, okay, so this happened and Jesus put a bubble around me because I'm supposed to do something with this. It's just not
Yeah.
my story. We're like, oh, it's not just my story. You can't hear my story without it being his story.
Right.
They're aligned, right? So that's actually a form of resiliency. So that's what I teach everybody. I teach it to foster children. Like when I work with them, right? And I'm like, okay, what is it that you get that nobody else does? They're like, what? I don't have a mom and dad. I'm like, I know. But what do you have that other kids don't have? You know? So that's kind of in regards to resiliency.
Yes. That's so
And
good.
clearly we know that faith is a huge part of that. The whole if you look at faith, it's about resiliency. You are not alone. Like all of the
Yeah.
songs, I am with you, right? Like I'm behind that sofa. I used to remember I and there's a song now which is quite interesting because I'm like, I think somebody heard my story. Like I like that song where Jesus is behind the sofa, right? Because I
Uh-huh.
can remember one time hiding because one foster home we would get shot with BB guns, and I would take my brother and we would hide behind something. And I remember saying like, "We're not alone. Jesus is with us." And my brother's like, "Who? Like Jesus? Oh, your imaginary friend." Like, okay, yeah, like he's with us. So in all those places, I wasn't alone. But yeah, that's still a form of resiliency.
Yes. Now, your commitment to donating book proceeds to foster care organizations is powerful. Why was that non negotiable for you?
That's the whole purpose of the books, right? The whole, because it's not about me. Like, at some point, somebody's like, "Are you narcissistic?" And I got somebody come out and ask me that. Because I'm sharing my story, and I'm like, "No, no, no, the whole purpose of sharing my story is for change." So if I'm not embarrassed by my story. I wasn't alone in my story. So the whole point of that is for change, and that's where if I'm gonna write the books, I have to serve a bigger
Yes.
right. And I remember at one point, the first story I wrote, I had an editor helping me. Actually, my professional editor, let me clarify. My professional editor, whose name is Judy, is magnificent. Magnificent. She is wonderful. I couldn't have done this series without Judy. Like she's been by my side the entire time. And I have another editor friend named Amy, and she's been magnificent. She helped me 20 years ago with the first draft. So the individual I'm talking about is not those two. Okay.
Okay.
So, but there was another editor, and she literally read the first copy of Just Another Slice and said to me she was concerned because Jesus was mentioned too many times. She said, "I'm afraid that you're going to lose readers because you have it. He's mentioned too many times." Well, that person is no longer part of my team, but I'm like, okay, like, yeah, no. I don't have him mentioned enough. You want my honest opinion? You know what I'm saying? Like, no, he's as mentioned as the role he had in
He's the main character.
this is his story. It's our story. Like
Yes.
how do you take a child and have them be where they are sharing his story? There's no what okay. I don't want to say there's no way that couldn't have happened without him, but come on, look at the chances, right? Like he can take and do amazing work in his arms. You cannot deny that he was not wrapped around this. I'm
Yeah.
aware of that. Right. So yeah, the idea of giving back and doing the whole change is the whole point because it's still his work.
Yes. That's beautiful. Now, what do you hope foster youth or adults who were once foster children feel when they read your books?
Their voice, that we don't have to be embarrassed by foster care,
Yeah.
right? Like, well, there's one time when I was a social worker working and I might have been a director at the time, I don't remember, but it was way back when AIDS was big, right? And I was a social worker for children that were dying of AIDS because it was back in the early 90s. All of our foster children were dying of AIDS and we placed them in foster homes. And there's this one little lady that was passing. She wasn't very old, 15 months, right? And the doctor was standing there and she'd passed. I'm holding the baby and cried. And the doctor she whispered, and she goes, "I was a foster kid too," whispered it. But that's what we do,
Yeah.
right? Think about it. Like, that's what foster kids are. That's sometimes we feel like a whisper,
Yeah.
and that's the whole idea. We don't have to be a whisper. It's not our fault our parents weren't capable. They just weren't capable. But look what we came out of. So that's what I want them to know, right? Is that everybody has a story. Everybody has a story, and they shouldn't be ashamed of their story. It's okay for them to have a voice because when you whisper, that impacts your self-worth and self-esteem. Why would you whisper if it didn't? That's
Yeah.
shame, right? So that's
Mhm.
what I want them to see. And I've gotten a lot of that. I received a lot of, "Oh my goodness, I want to write my story. How did you do it?" I'm like, "Do it. Write your story. Like, write your story. Have your voice." And so I've gotten a lot of messages from individuals in regards to that and them sharing their stories. So
Yes, it's own your experience without it becoming your identity. And part of what I do is own your story. I offer the experience to help people write their stories.
Yes.
They have come through life and their trauma and found Jesus.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, if someone listening today is in a waiting, healing, or survival season, what would you want to gently remind them of?
That you're not alone, right? That you this is not your forever. It's like find your space. This is only a moment. You can change you. Now, if we're talking children, so I'm gonna separate, right? If it's adults and they're in the healing, I'm like, you are not alone. And if you feel like you're alone, there is a church family waiting for you somewhere because you are not alone, right? Like, don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed to say, I'm struggling with this, or I'm having a hard
Yes.
time with this, or I'm struggling with depression, or why am I having these thoughts? There is somebody out there for everybody, right? Don't be afraid to kind of find that. And if you really feel like you have no direction, there's even for people that are in crisis mental health wise, there's like the new 988 number, which is where you can have instant connection to a therapist,
Mhm.
right? You can have an instant connection to that. If you're to walk into a church on a Sunday morning and go, hey, you do the welcome, like, welcome to our church. If you are to say, I need to talk to somebody right away, you're getting that person
Mhm.
immediately right there. So there is something there for everybody. In regards to children, I say the same thing though. Foster care has changed, right?
Mhm.
You don't have to be afraid to tell somebody that you're being hurt. You don't have to be afraid to say, this doesn't feel good to be here. You don't have to be afraid to say, I want to go to church. I want to do this. I want to do that. The key though is not being afraid, not being ashamed, because shame is what holds you back, right? They kind of go hand in hand. Being
Yeah.
embarrassed, feeling ashamed, that's gonna stop you from doing that, and so that's the key.
Yes. Now, how can listeners support foster care awareness in meaningful, tangible ways?
Oh, so many ways. I'm excited about this question. Well, first of all, there's so if you if you want to, like, if you can, call your local foster care agencies and ask that question. What
Okay.
can we do? Right. I am a big advocate, obviously, to, call your agencies and say, "How can we donate duffel bags? How can we donate luggage? How can we help you stop moving children in foster care with garbage bags?" Right? Excuse me. And
Yeah.
the other thing that people aren't aware of is something called CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocates. And this is something that is free. I mean, when it's free, meaning you can volunteer for this. If I would have had a CASA advocate, my life would have been completely different. A CASA exists in every community. Even one of my books, I did a presentation for CASA of the Southern Tier, and actually some proceeds from one of my books is donated to them. And what they do is you can follow a foster child around, right? So you can volunteer, and trust me, CASA is always looking for volunteers in regards to working. So what happened is, if you wanted to volunteer, it's kind of like you would be, let's just say you were appointed to my younger self. I was in foster care, right, Sarah? And you'd become my advocate, right?
Yeah.
You would follow me wherever. I'd have that constant person no matter what world I was in. So if you're my CASA, you come, we could play games together. You could take me to a movie. I guess it kind of resembles like a big brother, big sister kind of program in the old days, right? But when it
Yeah.
comes to like foster children, and if I move to a home, you go with me. You're
Mm.
my constant. If I change caseworkers, you're still with me. So it's a fantastic program. And I even had somebody reach out to me from Illinois. I received this message from somebody named Sarah who was with CASA, and she asked me to jump on to do a Zoom call. I'm like, absolutely. I'll be happy to jump on for a Zoom call. They're actually using my series as their training. But she goes, we
Oh,
are using your books as training CASA workers of like how to work with foster children. Would you be willing to jump on for as quick? Everybody wants. I'm like, absolutely. I'd be happy to jump on for a quick Zoom call. But CASA is an amazing program. If you find that you don't have the time for that, if you call and say, or even call organizations like Foster Love, Ticket to Dream, there's so many foster care agencies that already have their legal things set up for fundraising. If you were to call them and say, can I do a bowl-a-thon and donate the money to you? They would be all on board for that. So look at foster care online, non-for-profit organizations that are helping foster children. And all you need to do is call them and say, can we do a fundraiser? And they would
yeah.
be more than happy to do that.
Yeah. I feel like I should be planning something. Goodness. Now, how can our listeners support and follow you and what you do?
So I'm happy to give you my website. So the
Mhm.
website is www.drsharon, Dr. Sharon, ZD.com.
And everything's on there.
Yep, everything is on there. All of the books are on Amazon, and they're on all the different platforms in regards to my story.
And I'm going to put those in the show notes, as well as I'm going to link them on my resource page on my website, ridiculous.com.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's awesome. Thank you.
Dr. Sharon, please close us in prayer.
Thank you. Dear Jesus, thank you for being with me during this episode of my very first podcast, sharing your story with my story. Thank you for all the blessings you've given me, including my children and grandchildren. And thank you for giving me the strength and the power and protecting me to share your story. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Dr. Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your story with such honesty, courage, and grace. Your willingness to give voice to your younger self and to children who are still walking similar paths is truly powerful. Friends, if today's episode resonated with you, whether because of your own story, your heart for foster care, or your journey toward healing, I encourage you to check out Dr. Sharon's website and her book series, Garbage Bag Life. It's an invitation not just to understand foster care, but to approach it with empathy, awareness, and hope. As always, if this episode encouraged you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need it, subscribing to the podcast, or leaving a review. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thank you for spending time with us. And remember, your story matters, your voice matters, and God is still working even in the waiting. Until next time, this is the Ridiculous Faith Podcast.